much for having me. It's so nice to be here. So, as she mentioned, I'm here to talk about the magic of technology. It's especially fun for me to be here because before I was at Dora, I was at Chef. If anyone here has ever heard of Chef, configuration management, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Salt, a few hands? No, we're just here for the free food and coffee. Okay, that works. Before that, I was a professor. This is awesome. This is like the best lecture ever. Before that, I was at IBM. So I used to work with log systems and log files and hardware. I did this for a long time. But I love to talk about the science because I used to work with all of these systems, and I would go to my manager, and I would be like, I know how to make things better. I heard about this team, and this team did this thing. And my manager would be like, cool story. It's never going to work for us. Have you guys ever heard this? Right? Oh. So I decided to go get my PhD because I wanted to be able to say, you know what? It is going to work for us because it's worked for hundreds of teams. That's why I wanted to know the science. And then there was also this article that came out in Harvard Business Review. Did you guys ever hear about Harvard Business Review? In 2003, Nicholas Carr said, IT doesn't matter. The title of the article was IT doesn't matter, so that sucks. We're done. He kind of had a point, and the point was that for way too many years, people had only used technology to make things faster, like things that suck, that we shouldn't be doing by hand, like accounting, right? Let's not do accounting by hand. Let's not do HR systems by hand. But there's a way to make IT and companies and businesses and everything awesome, right? There is a magical formula. But it's way too hard for us to go back to our organizations and our managers and be like, this team did it. Oh, it's not going to work for us. Just keep doing it. So that's why I think the science is important. And that's what we're going to talk about, right? How to help our companies and our organizations and our own teams do things the right way or the better way, or like, here's what we know, okay? So the secrets, science edition. So here's what we're going to talk about. The first thing is like how to make our data suck less, right? It helps if we find a way to measure it so that we know what things are working. Because otherwise, we only know if we have like massive epic wins or massive epic failures. That doesn't help us. The key to improvement is small wins over time. So if we catch it early, if it's a small win or a small failure, we can catch it and then we can do course corrections. Okay, so in some ways, sometimes I use surveys. We'll talk about that, okay? Surveys, it's fine. Also, what we found that we did and didn't expect, and then we'll talk about things like continuous delivery, all of the automation stuff, things like lean management. I'll also talk about culture. Really quickly, who here has heard of the state of DevOps reports? Has anyone heard of these? No. Y'all, this is good stuff. Not just because I did it. Also because I did, no, okay. The state of DevOps reports have been put out. These are the largest studies on DevOps that have been done ever in the world. So I've been doing this as part of I've been doing studies around what makes software development and delivery awesome since about 2007. And I'm the only one that's been consistently doing it from an academic point of view for that long. But we also started doing them, we paired up with Puppet, Puppet Lab, it was Puppet Labs, now it's just Puppet, in about 2014. These are the largest studies of DevOps, like what makes software development and delivery awesome. We have over 23,000 data points around the world, in all industries, in all verticals. So all of this data that I'll be presenting today comes from that. The great thing is that so many of these findings have been verified, validated from researchers in places like MIT, Stanford, Harvard. So that's where a lot of this is coming from. So first of all, not all data is created equal. Much of this data comes from surveys. Turn around for this. Who here thinks surveys are bad? Some hands. That's cool. Some hands. Who here loves the data in their log files? Okay. Fair. Fair. I worked on hardware systems. I have a hardware patent. Oh, hold on. Who here has seen shit data in your log files? Y'all are liars. There's bad data in our log, or you are not looking hard enough. There's bad data in our system files, right? I'm seeing some. Yes, there is bad data in your log files. Let me tell you a story. So I was at IBM for several years. I used my expertise prior to my PhD was hardware system analysis, and one of my specialty areas was RAID rebuild. But I worked on enterprise system storage and disk, and we had we called it the box, right? It was like a refrigerator size, United States refrigerator size, like giant. We like our food, not like you though. Y'all have the best food. I've been eating my way through Italy. It's the best thing in the world. I was so happy I could fit in my jeans this morning. Okay. Like giant box of hard drives, right? We knew, well, first of all, our data was bad. So we fixed all our data. We optimized the system performance of this drive. This is 2004, so back before SSDs were really a thing. I'm old, super old. We optimized the performance of the box. We were collecting data on the entire stack, okay? I knew the entire stack, how well this box was performing. Every once in a while, I was hearing back from a customer that the box was slow. And I'm like, no, it's not. You're trying to get out of an SLA, right? We've done this, right? We've heard this. Someone says our performance is slow. We're like, no, it's not. Who's done this before? Right? I'm like, nope. I'm like, okay, maybe we tweak it, we optimize it. I am good. Suddenly, I start hearing back from several customers in different industry verticals all over the place, and they're all saying the same thing to the same degree. Now, they don't have the level of precision that my log files do, right? They can't tell me to milliseconds and nanoseconds how slow the box is, but they're all telling me to the same degree of seconds that the box is slow. I'm like, okay, right? You know what? Sometimes asking people is relevant. So then I send out a survey, and I'm like, dear people, is the box slow? And they're all telling me to the same degree, to the same direction that something's slow. Turns out my box was amazing. Getting to the box sucked. The interface to the box was slow. Sometimes asking people tells you things that you don't otherwise know. So we decided that sometimes we need to ask people things. So the way we do it through the State of DevOps reports is through a latent construct, because sometimes you just can't ask people things. So if I wanted to get, for example, the temperature of this room, I can ask that. But if I want to understand the culture of a team, I can't get the organizational culture of a team. I can't get the organizational culture temperature of a team. So I want to do it through a latent construct. And the best way to do that is to ask several different questions around that. So I can ask about how well the team communicates. I can ask about how well they trust each other. I can ask several different questions, and then I can combine that. And we call this psychometrics. By the way, this ends up being super, super important. Tangent, story time. So wait, first of all, I take this for granted. Have we heard that culture is important in making software? Do we agree with this? Okay, good. Tangent. A really good friend of mine studied the scientists that work at NASA and put the robots out that go study the planets. So the Cassini mission studies Jupiter. And the way that was, you can't reorganize because they built it into the robot and the robot left. And then you did the Mars rover mission, and then the rover mission left. So Cassini was done super matrix. Every single team has their very own instrument. Rover, they all shared instruments. The rover mission, at the end of every meeting, they all have to go around the room and say, I am happy. And they all have to mean it. Rover was supposed to last 6 or 8 weeks, and rover, they named it curiosity lived like 3 or 4 years. Cassini, super different. Like if you want to take a picture of the planet, you have to agree ahead of time, the robot has to move. When the scientists start fighting, Cassini starts breaking. Cassini is around a planet. Do you think Cassini actually knows that the scientists are fighting? No. This is true, though. This is true of our technology. So organizational culture matters. It matters to our technology. So it's relevant and important and useful to make sure that, like, we all hug it out, right? We joke about that. It's important to know that our culture makes a difference. So the way we measure this is through psychometrics. And we do this to make our survey data good or give us a reasonable assurance that what we're measuring actually matters. By the way, we can do this for our log data as well. We can measure things with more than one data point out of our log files. Because you know how sometimes, like, somebody will touch a data piece? By the way, who here is developers? Who here is on the ops side? Okay, who here is on the test or QA side? Okay, we're mostly devs. Who here has, like, ever touched a data file and swore nothing was gonna break, and then it broke? Okay, also liars. I was a dev for a hot second, and I was like, no, everything's gonna be fine. Oops, right? There have been times where, like, we build in a measure, and we're like, oh, oops, right? We do this occasionally with our metrics. If we only have one metric, and we oops it, and then our metrics go haywire. If we build in several things to measure something and one goes a little bit haywire, we catch it. If we rely on only one measure and it goes a little haywire, we might never ever catch it. Okay, so we can do this with our log files. So when we do psychometrics, it follows a couple different steps. The first thing we do is manual. We think about it. If possible, we use previously validated constructs. Okay. Has someone ever measured this before? Can we refer to other people's work? Based on definitions and theory, how do we want to measure it? What's the important way to measure it? And then we evaluate it with statistics. So anytime, if anyone wants to look up the state of DevOps reports, these are the steps that we use. So when people are like, oh, it's surveys, no. This has all been published in peer review. These are all really, really academically rigorous stuff. We establish validity, both discriminant and convergent. I make sure it's not measuring anything it's not supposed to measure. It's only measuring the things it's supposed to measure. Also, I establish reliability, another statistical way to make sure that basically everyone's reading it the same way they're supposed to be reading it. Okay, so an example here, I talked about culture, right? Culture's important. Well, we say it's important. Everyone's like, yeah, culture's important. Okay, in theory, what do I mean by culture, though? Am I talking about national identity and culture? In financial literature, in accounting literature, that's what we're talking about. But I don't think that's what we're talking about, right? If I point back to that NASA example, like robots in space, they're not talking about national identity and culture. Do we talk about a culture that values learning? We included that in the 2014 study. I think what we're really talking about is a culture that values information flow, trust, stuff like that. So what we did is we went to, we referred to a study by Dr. Ron Westrom. He's a sociologist. Here's what he studied. He studied contexts that are high risk, highly complex. He studies things like healthcare, aviation. It's predictive of safety and performance outcomes, and it helps explain what happens when things go wrong. Sounds a lot like technology. So there are 3 different types of organizational typologies here. One is pathological, low cooperation, shoot the messenger, bridging's discouraged, novelty's crushed. Okay, who here has a friend that works in a pathological culture? Has a friend? Okay. Along our data set, 23,000 data points, about 15% of the population reports in here. Bureaucratic culture, modest cooperation, messengers are neglected. If someone brings you bad news, we're like, nice, don't want to hear it. Narrow responsibilities. So if I give you a work task, job to do, Like, you know exactly what it is you're supposed to do. Bridging tolerated, like we don't really talk to people with different job responsibilities. Failure leads to justice. If you do something wrong, like we will take care of that. Novelty leads to problems, right? If you come up with a super creative solution, don't know how we're gonna deal with that. Who here has a friend that works in a bureaucratic work environment? Okay, about 55% works in here. Okay, generative. We see this in our high-performing teams. High cooperation. Messengers are trained. What that means is, like, if there's a problem, I want to train people to come tell me about it, right? Because I want to know. I want to surface those problems. Risks are shared. Bridging's encouraged, right? Dev, talk to ops, talk to test, right? Like, we want to know all the things. Failure leads to inquiry. If something, like, breaks, I super want to know about it, because that gives me an opportunity to fix it. Novelty is implemented. This is super cool. Who here has a friend or works in this place? It's about a third of our population. Also, statistically significant. I see way more instances of this in our high-performing teams. This is how we wrote this, right? So if I'm going to turn this into survey questions, because this didn't appear in Ron Westrom's paper, this is how we wrote it. Because some people are like, how are you going to measure this? But it's important to measure. Hopefully I've convinced you it's important to measure. And we can't just go to HR databases, because people are like, oh, just look and see if people quit. See if people leave the company. Sometimes they leave the company because, like, they get offered way more money, or their partner gets a job offer somewhere else and they need to go somewhere else. Or I come to Rome and I'm like, this is full of amazing food and the nicest people. I'm moving to Rome, right? I didn't leave because my work culture was bad. I left because Rome's amazing. So this is how you measure work culture. You can have 6 items measured on a scale from 1 is strongly disagree, 7 is strongly agree. This gives you shades of gray. Then you can average them together. On my team, information's actively sought, right? Can you imagine answering this, right? You want to have them strongly worded so people aren't just kind of like, kinda. Or if they are just, kinda, like, it's okay. There are several teams now around industry doing this quarterly, maybe twice a year, because it gives them a good pulse check. And if suddenly their team, like, tanks, it's like, oh, shoot, time to fix something. Time to look to see what's happening. We found this to be statistically valid and reliable. It is predictive of IT performance, how well you can make and deliver software, and organizational performance. Organizational performance is profitability, productivity, and market share. Nerd moment. Dr. Westrom found out I had been, like, adapting and using his work, and he emailed me, and he told me I was doing it right. Yay! I was super excited, because for a minute there, I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. Oh, shoot, did I do it right? Okay. So, also Science Edition. Psychometric Analysis. Notification of failure. We had a hypothesis that notification of failure would also be highly correlated and predictive of IT performance, that ability to make and deliver software. So these were the items that we came up with. So we went through the initial steps of writing the items very carefully, doing a card sorting task. So then it came up to the step of figuring out, or testing it statistically. So there's the statistical step where we throw it in, and we're like, okay, does everything load together, right? So statistically, do they all land in the same pile? Turns out they don't. Can you figure out where they might not be the same thing? They aren't measuring quite the same thing statistically. By the way, this is research. Sometimes it's like, psych, you're not quite right. And this is why it's good to have more than one measure. This is what we find out. It loads into 2 different piles. We're primarily notified of failures by reports from customers and notified of failures by the NOC. And we get failure alerts from logging monitoring systems, and monitoring a system held based on threshold warnings and rate of change warnings. So it doesn't tell us why, though. But we realize that some of those notifications come from near, like automated systems, and some come from far. Now, this isn't to say that a knock is a bad thing. It's just farther away from our proximal systems. So because we had more than one measurement, we can see that we have two different groupings. Can anyone guess which one is predictive of the ability to, or IT performance, which one's predictive of software development and delivery, high performance? The second one, right? Near. If we didn't have multiple measures, we wouldn't have known. If we just said, who does monitoring, right? We wouldn't have known that there's a big differentiator there. Okay, by the way, I also do a whole bunch of other data tests, right? Like I make sure that there isn't variance introduced just because I only collect data from one area. I check for early and late responders, drop-off rates and bias. Okay, in theory, now I can look at the data. One quick check. Y'all a bunch of engineers, so I'm sure you do this anyway. But make sure you always keep your skeptic hat on. Anytime a report comes out that uses words like prediction or cause, I'm sure y'all have heard like correlation doesn't imply causation. Yeah, for real. Here's the thing. One of three conditions must be met. It either needs to be a longitudinal study, which means they collect data over time. In some ways, the State of DevOps report does. This is the 4th year we've done it. The latest report's going to be coming out the first week of June. But technically, this isn't a longitudinal data report. I have data over time, but I don't have matched data over time. I don't collect the same data from people over time. I don't match their data points, so this doesn't count. Randomized experimental design, this isn't randomized or experimental. It's just a cross-sectional data point. I do use theory-based design, which means I have a stated hypothesis that is based in theory, and then I test it. Occasionally, people say, well, aren't you just doing confirmation bias? No, this is how science works, right? I state a hypothesis, and then I test it. Now, so anytime, if you look at these reports, they are free. They're totally free because we want to help make the industry better. If I meet this condition, if it's theory-based design, then we will use the word like prediction. Otherwise, we will only use the word correlation. And here's why. Have you guys ever heard of the website Spurious Correlations? It's hilarious. Did you know that, Nicolas Cage movies are highly correlated with backyard swimming pool deaths in the United States? I do not believe one causes the other. Also, cheese consumption and strangulation by bed sheets. Highly correlated. That does not mean one causes the other. You can always dig into data somewhere and find very, 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 very high correlations and say that one predicts or causes the other. You never should. And so that is why we are very, very careful about that. And whenever we start writing up the report, I will always go through and very late at night, start using very strong words about the wording we can use in the report. Okay, now we are going to start tearing through. This is super important. This is one of my favorite things. IT performance and behavior. IT performance, I keep saying this all the time. This is what we mean. You can have both speed and stability. You get both. For years, we've been hearing that you can't have stability, you have to slow it down. I've got over 23,000 data points. You can have both. The highest performers get both. By the way, I get 3 groups, and I'm not very creative. The high performers get both. The low performers suck at everything. The medium performers are in the middle. I don't see trade-offs anywhere. That's what I see. Also, IT performance matters. Remember before how I said Nicholas Carr said IT doesn't matter? That was in 2003 based on the previous 20 years of data. That was when people would buy technology and plug it in and walk away. Guess what? IT's different now. And it's because we're doing it with technology and process, lean management principles, and culture. If we have all 3, then it's different. And here's why. Firms with high-performing IT organizations are twice as likely to exceed profitability, productivity, and market share goals. So guess what? Companies are paying attention now. And we have found this now, spoiler alert, 4 years in a row. I just ran the data last week. That's for the 2017 report. So 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. This has also been replicated and found by researchers at MIT, Harvard, and Stanford. So IT absolutely matters. So now, if your bosses are like, you're just a cost center, absolutely not. We, all of us right here, raise your hands, because who works in tech? We make a difference. We're the ones making a difference and making a difference at the top line, revenue, and the bottom line, net income. So, yay us. Thanks, us. For real. IT performance is predictive of organizational performance. You're welcome, companies and organizations and government. Thanks to us. Okay. So this appears in the 2016 report. You can identify if you're a high, medium, or low IT performer. I gotta hurry, because I know we all want coffee, so I'm gonna race. I said that we have to have technology and lean performance and culture. Here's what I mean by technology. We need to have effective test data management. We need to have test and deployment automation. We need to be doing trunk-based development. Don't believe me, believe Jez Humble. He wrote continuous delivery, it's fine. Also, all my data says the same thing. We also need to version control all the things, not just your application code. Talk to your ops people. They need to be version controlling all their stuff too. Also, we can shift left on security and it makes everything better. By the way, everything over here on this side, if it's an arrow, it means predicts. Everything on this side of the box, arrow means predicts. Less rework, less deployment pain. That means your work feels better. Things are going to suck less. Higher IT performance, that means both throughput and stability. Lower change fail rates. And that means that I want to stay at my company, which means hiring and retention gets better. Also, this right here, this means money. That's awesome. Dear companies, this is awesome. Some surprises. Oh, I'm going to skip this because we're in a hurry. Also, less unplanned work. Who doesn't like having to redo all the stuff for like the 4th time? Yeah. See, faster feedback, more automation, or if we do have to redo it, who would rather redo it in an hour instead of 3 weeks later when we have to remember what it was that we just did, right? See, y'all my people. We totally get this. Okay, surprises with culture. I'm going to hurry. It was funny. I started doing culture, and people were like, Nicole, you're the culture girl. I'm like, I have a hardware patent. What do you mean I'm the culture girl? And then Google did it, and they're like, oh, I guess you were right. Google studied their teams, and they were like, oh, they thought it would be like the perfect mix of an R programmer and a project manager and a Node.js person. No, do you know what's the #1 most important thing to make the perfect high-performing team? Psychological safety. Trust the people you work with. That's what's important. Right? Or how are we feeling this? Am I crazy? No. Right? See? We're feeling it. Okay. Management stuff. Oh, something that was interesting. Work in process. We're like, work in process is important. Correlation didn't make sense. I was like, why is this not making sense? Because by the way, when you do research, sometimes we're like, yeah, and sometimes we're like, what? Why is this not making sense? Guess why? Because WIP makes sense only if it's part of all the lean management stuff. Over here, again, all the arrows mean predict. Lean management makes culture better. It makes our delivery better. Also, it decreases burnout. Who here has felt the burnout? You don't have to raise your hand. I felt the burnout, though. Also, money. So our bosses care. Okay, conclusions. Even if you think it's obvious, test with data. If the results don't surprise you, you're doing it wrong. If nothing surprises you, you're doing it wrong. We can't have it all, or at least throughput and stability. IT matters, but you have to do it right. You have to have automation. You have to have lean management stuff. And you have to be paying attention to culture. If we have all 3, you get the magic, and then yay. Okay, for more sciencing, we just posted a free ROI white paper. You can also get the peer-reviewed research. You can also get links to all of the State of DevOps reports that I mentioned, 2014, 2015, 2016. The 2017 report is coming out the first week of June. I went super fast through the end because I'm American, I talk too fast. Oh wait, Italians talk fast too, we're good. Thank you so much for your time. I will let you go get coffee. Thank you.